What if the smallest act of kindness you ever witnessed turned out to be the beginning of a miracle no amount of money could ever buy? The checkout scanner beeped one final time as Ethan Brooks emptied every coin from his weathered jacket pocket onto the counter. Quarters rolled across the glass. Nickels spun in tiny circles. Pennies rested beside folded $1 bills that had clearly been used and reused more times than anyone should ever notice. Across from him stood his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, hugging a small brown teddy bear against her chest, as though letting go would break her heart. The toy wasn't expensive by most standards, but for a homeless father trying to survive another cold week, it felt impossible. Ethan quietly counted again. $27.14. He already knew the number before he finished. He was $12 short. The young cashier offered a sympathetic smile before gently shaking her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I wish I could help." Ethan lowered his eyes for only a moment before looking back at his daughter with the same calm expression he always tried to wear whenever life disappointed them. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "Maybe next time." Lily smiled in the way children sometimes do when they love someone enough to hide their own sadness. She carefully kissed the teddy bear's tiny forehead before placing it back on the shelf. "He's really cute," she whispered. "Maybe another little girl needs him more than I do." Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest, but he refused to let his pain show. Pride had been the only thing life had failed to take from him. Around them, shoppers continued filling expensive carts with toys, decorations, and gifts. A man impatiently checked his watch. Another customer sighed loudly, annoyed by the delay. Ethan simply gathered his handful of change, thanked the cashier for her patience, and reached for Lily's hand. Then a quiet voice interrupted the silence. "Excuse me. I believe that bear has already been paid for." Ethan turned in surprise, but all he caught was the glimpse of a woman in an elegant cream-colored coat walking toward the exit without looking back. Her long blonde hair disappeared into the afternoon crowd as quickly as she had appeared. "Ma'am," Ethan called politely, taking one step forward. "Please, I can't accept charity." The cashier smiled as she handed him the receipt. She said it wasn't charity. She said every little girl deserves a birthday hug. Ethan looked down at the paper in his hand. No name, no message, only the word paid printed across the bottom. Lily wrapped her arms around the teddy bear again, her bright blue eyes sparkling with quiet joy. Ethan smiled for the first time that day, unaware that somewhere high above them, a security camera had captured every second of the moment, and that the woman who had quietly walked away was already watching the footage again, unable to forget the homeless father who had protected his daughter's dignity even when he had almost nothing left to give. That evening, the autumn wind drifted through the city streets as Ethan and Lily walked back toward the aging pickup truck they had quietly called home for almost 6 months. The teddy bear rested safely in Lily's lap as though it were the most valuable treasure in the world. She smiled at it every few seconds, then looked at her father with the same gentle gratitude that always made him wonder how someone so young had learned to expect so little. "Thank you for bringing me to the store anyway, Daddy," she said softly. Ethan unlocked the truck and opened the passenger door for her before answering. "You never have to thank me for trying." She climbed inside and hugged the bear tightly. "I still wish you could have bought it yourself." Ethan paused for only a second before smiling. "So do I." He closed the door carefully and walked around to the driver's side. The old truck groaned as the engine struggled to come alive. After the third attempt it finally started, filling the quiet parking lot with its familiar uneven rumble. They drove only a few miles before stopping beside a small church that allowed overnight parking for people with nowhere else to go. It was not much, but it was safe, and safety had become its own kind of blessing. Ethan unfolded a worn blanket across the back seat while Lily carefully tucked the teddy bear beside her backpack. Every movement she made was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though she feared waking from a beautiful dream. "Do you think she was an angel?" Lily asked while looking out the window at the stars beginning to appear above the church steeple. Ethan chuckled quietly. Maybe she was just someone who remembered what kindness feels like. Lily nodded. "I hope one day I can do that for somebody else." Her words settled into the silence like a prayer. Ethan looked away for a moment because he did not trust his voice. Life had taken his house, his woodworking shop, his savings, and nearly every plan he had ever made. But somehow it had never managed to steal the goodness growing inside his daughter. Early the next morning, before sunrise painted the sky pale blue, Ethan slipped out of the truck and walked toward the church kitchen. Every weekday, he volunteered to help prepare breakfast before searching for temporary construction work. The pastor had offered him money more than once, but Ethan always accepted only a meal and the chance to earn his place. He swept floors, carried supplies, repaired broken shelves, and fixed anything that needed a steady pair of hands. "You know," Pastor Daniel said as he watched Ethan quietly repair a loose cabinet door, "most people would have asked for help by now." Ethan tightened the final screw before closing the cabinet with gentle precision. "There is nothing wrong with accepting help," he replied. "I just want to deserve it." The pastor smiled without answering. Outside, the first rays of sunlight reached across the church parking lot, completely unaware that several miles away, inside the glass headquarters of Sinclair Toy Company, a woman in a cream-colored coat had paused an executive meeting because she could not stop thinking about the father who believed dignity was worth more than comfort. On her desk lay a printed screenshot from the security camera, showing Ethan returning the teddy bear to the shelf before anyone had stepped forward to help. And for reasons she could not yet explain, Charlotte Sinclair knew that this story was far from over. Charlotte Sinclair had built one of the largest toy companies in America by trusting numbers, reports, and careful decisions. Yet for the first time in years, none of those things could explain why the image of one quiet father refused to leave her thoughts. The screenshot remained on her desk long after the morning meeting had ended. It showed Ethan standing beside the checkout counter, his shoulders tired but straight, gently taking the teddy bear from Lily before anyone offered help. There was no anger on his face, no bitterness, only the quiet determination of a father protecting his daughter's dignity. Charlotte leaned back in her chair and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Thousands of people hurried through another busy workday, each carrying dreams and disappointments invisible to everyone around them. She suddenly wondered how many acts of quiet courage passed unnoticed every single day. Her assistant, Megan, stepped inside carrying a folder. "Your board meeting begins in 15 minutes. Charlotte nodded but did not move. "Megan, could you do something for me?" Her assistant smiled politely. "Of course." Charlotte slid the printed security image across the desk. "Find this man." Megan blinked in surprise. "Do you know his name?" "No." "Where he works?" "No." "Anything at all?" Charlotte looked back at the photograph. "I only know he refused to lose his self-respect in front of his little girl." Megan hesitated before picking up the picture. She had worked beside Charlotte for almost 8 years and had never seen her distracted by a stranger. "I will see what I can find." Meanwhile, several miles away, Ethan finished repairing a broken bookshelf in the church library before quietly packing away his tools. Pastor Daniel handed him a paper bag filled with sandwiches and fresh fruit. "One for you and one for Lily." Ethan accepted the bag with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I will replace those loose windows tomorrow morning." "You do not owe us anything," the pastor replied gently. Ethan shook his head. "Kindness deserves gratitude. Gratitude deserves action." As he walked toward the truck, an elderly woman struggled to carry 2 heavy grocery bags across the parking lot. Without hesitation, Ethan set down his own bag, carried hers to her car, and wished her a wonderful afternoon before leaving without waiting for thanks. None of it was planned. None of it was performed for recognition. It was simply who he had become after life had taken almost everything except his character. Late that afternoon, Megan returned to Charlotte's office with surprising news. "We identified him." Charlotte looked up immediately. "His name is Ethan Brooks, former owner of a custom woodworking shop. His wife passed away 3 years ago. Medical bills and business debt forced him into bankruptcy. He has been homeless for months, but according to everyone we spoke with, he spends most mornings volunteering at St. Andrew Community Church before searching for day labor." Charlotte slowly closed the folder. The facts explained his circumstances, but they still did not explain his grace. She reached for her coat and car keys. "Cancel my last meeting." Megan looked puzzled. "Where are you going?" Charlotte smiled softly. "I think it is time to meet the man who reminded me what our company was supposed to stand for." The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the church parking lot as Ethan wiped the dust from his hands and climbed into the driver's seat beside Lily. She was sitting quietly with the little teddy bear buckled into the seat between them, smiling as though she had gained a new member of the family. He needs a name, she said. Ethan laughed softly for the first time in days. That sounds like a serious responsibility. Lily thought for a moment before answering. Hope. Ethan looked at her with gentle surprise. Why Hope? She hugged the bear close. Because every time I look at him, I remember that good people still exist. Ethan started the truck without replying. Some answers were too beautiful to interrupt. Across town, Charlotte parked her car a short distance from St. Andrew Community Church instead of pulling directly into the lot. She did not want Ethan to feel as though he was being investigated or rescued. She wanted to understand the man behind the photograph before she ever introduced herself. Wearing a simple navy sweater and blue jeans instead of her usual business attire, she blended easily with the volunteers arriving to help prepare the evening meal. No one recognized the billionaire executive who spent most weekdays leading board meetings from the top floor of a glass tower. Inside the fellowship hall, warm aromas of homemade soup and fresh bread filled the air while volunteers arranged folding tables for families in need. Charlotte quietly accepted an apron and joined the serving line. As she worked, her eyes searched the room until they found Ethan repairing a loose chair leg in the corner with a borrowed screwdriver. He finished the repair, tested the chair carefully, then carried it back without expecting anyone to notice. A young volunteer approached him with concern. Mr. Brooks, we can replace that old chair. Ethan smiled politely. It still has years left if someone gives it a little care. Charlotte watched in silence. Minutes later, an elderly man accidentally dropped his tray, sending cups and napkins across the floor. Before anyone else reacted, Ethan knelt beside him. Do not worry, he said calmly. Nothing here cannot be cleaned. He helped the man back into his chair, gathered the spilled items, and quietly prepared another tray before returning to his own work. There was no performance in his kindness. There was no audience he hoped to impress. He simply saw people the way a craftsman saw worn furniture, not as something broken beyond repair, but as something still worthy of patience. Charlotte felt an unfamiliar heaviness settle inside her heart. She had donated millions of dollars through corporate foundations over the years, yet somehow this man, with almost nothing to his name, seemed wealthier than many executives she had known. As the evening came to an end, Pastor Daniel walked over to Ethan carrying a folded envelope. A local family wanted to thank you for repairing their porch last week. Ethan looked inside, then quietly removed several bills before placing the rest back into the envelope. This is too much, he said. The work only took 2 hours. The pastor smiled. They insisted. Ethan gently shook his head. Then please use the extra money for the food pantry. There are families here who need it more than I do. Standing only a few feet away, Charlotte heard every word. In that moment, she realized she had not found a man who needed saving. She had found a man whose character deserved to be honored, and for the first time since taking over her father's company, she began wondering whether the greatest investment she could ever make was not in another business, but in one extraordinary human being. Charlotte left the church long after the last volunteer had gone home, yet instead of feeling satisfied, she felt humbled. During the drive back to her office, the city lights reflected across her windshield while Ethan's quiet words echoed in her thoughts. Kindness deserves gratitude. Gratitude deserves action. She had heard countless motivational speeches from successful entrepreneurs, celebrated executives, and influential leaders, but none of them carried the quiet weight of that simple sentence. The next morning, she made another decision that surprised even herself. She asked Megan not to schedule interviews, publicity events, or investor meetings until the afternoon. I have somewhere else to be, she explained with a calm smile. Instead of driving to headquarters, Charlotte stopped at a small public park a few blocks from St. Andrew Community Church. She had learned from Pastor Daniel that Ethan often brought Lily there before walking her to school. The autumn air felt crisp, and golden leaves drifted gently across the playground as children laughed from the swings. Charlotte sat on a nearby bench with a cup of coffee, pretending to read while quietly observing the morning around her. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared, holding Lily's backpack over one shoulder while she skipped happily beside him, the little teddy bear tucked safely under her arm. Daddy, Hope wants to see the ducks, Lily said with complete seriousness. Ethan smiled. Then we should not keep him waiting. They walked toward the small pond where several ducks floated peacefully across the water. Lily broke a piece of bread into tiny crumbs while Ethan reminded her, only a little. We never feed them more than they need. Charlotte noticed how every lesson he taught his daughter carried the same quiet respect, not only for people, but for every living thing around them. As they prepared to leave, Lily noticed another little girl sitting alone on a nearby bench with tears in her eyes because the ribbon had fallen from her favorite stuffed rabbit. Without hesitation, Lily carried Hope over and gently placed the teddy bear beside the child. "You can hug him until your bunny feels better," she whispered. Ethan watched silently, never interrupting. When the little girl's mother thanked Lily, Ethan simply said, "She learns by watching the people around her." Charlotte lowered her eyes. He had no idea that she was the stranger listening only a few yards away. Before walking to school, Lily handed Hope back to her father with a bright smile. "See, Daddy? Hope makes people smile." Ethan nodded. That is exactly what Hope is supposed to do. Those words settled deeply inside Charlotte's heart. She suddenly understood that the teddy bear she had quietly purchased was no longer just a toy. It had become a daily reminder of compassion passed from one person to another. As Ethan and Lily disappeared down the sidewalk, Charlotte remained seated beneath the old maple tree, realizing she could no longer remain an invisible observer. If she truly admired this man's character, eventually she would have to step into his story, not with pity, not with charity, but with an opportunity worthy of the dignity he had spent every day protecting. 2 days later, the sky over Chicago turned a soft gray as a steady autumn rain settled across the city, coating sidewalks with shimmering reflections and sending people rushing beneath umbrellas. Ethan stood outside a neighborhood hardware store just after sunrise, hoping someone would need an extra pair of skilled hands for a repair project. His worn toolbox rested beside his boots, polished not because it was expensive, but because he believed every craftsman should respect his tools regardless of his circumstances. Several contractors arrived, looked over the waiting workers, and drove away. By late morning, only Ethan remained. He did not complain. He simply adjusted his jacket and prepared to walk back toward the church. A black sedan slowed to a stop across the street. Charlotte watched quietly through the windshield, her heart growing heavier as she realized he had waited nearly 4 hours without a single opportunity. She could have walked over with money, but she already knew exactly what he would do. He would thank her kindly and refuse it. That was not pride born from arrogance. It was dignity protected through hardship. She drove away without introducing herself, but her thoughts moved faster than the traffic. Back at Sinclair Toy Company, she entered a storage room filled with handcrafted toy prototypes collected by her late father over decades. Wooden trains, rocking horses, music boxes, doll cradles, and carved animals lined the shelves beneath warm lights. Many needed restoration before they could be displayed in the company's upcoming heritage exhibition. Charlotte gently picked up a beautifully carved wooden rocking bear with a cracked leg. "Who usually restores these?" she asked. Megan checked her tablet. "We outsource them to specialty workshops, but the waiting list is several months long." Charlotte slowly ran her fingers across the smooth wood grain. "What if we found someone who truly understood craftsmanship?" Megan looked at her carefully. "You are thinking about Ethan Brooks." Charlotte nodded. He built custom furniture and handmade toys before losing his business. He is exactly the kind of craftsman my father admired. Megan smiled. "Then why not offer him the work?" Charlotte looked toward the collection of heirloom toys. "Because I do not want him to feel rescued. I want him to feel respected." That afternoon, Pastor Daniel received an unexpected visitor. Charlotte explained her idea without mentioning the teddy bear or the security footage. "I would like to hire Mr. Brooks as an independent restoration craftsman. Full pay, professional contract, flexible hours so he can still care for Lily." The pastor's eyes brightened. "That sounds like an answer to many prayers." Charlotte gently shook her head. "No, it should sound like an opportunity he has earned." Later, that evening, Ethan finished repairing another broken shelf inside the church pantry when Pastor Daniel approached with a sealed envelope. "Someone left this for you," he said with a quiet smile. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was not money, but a formal invitation requesting a meeting regarding a paid woodworking restoration project at Sinclair Toy Company. He read every line twice before looking back at the pastor in confusion. "There must be some mistake," Ethan said softly. "I have never even applied there." Pastor Daniel smiled, but offered no explanation. Outside, Lily waited in the truck with Hope resting in her lap. When Ethan climbed inside, She noticed the letter in his hand. "Daddy," she asked with innocent curiosity, "is something good finally coming?" Ethan looked through the rain-covered windshield, folded the letter carefully, and answered with the quiet honesty that had carried them this far. "I do not know yet, sweetheart. But for the first time in a long while, it feels like someone sees what I can do instead of only seeing what I have lost." Ethan barely slept that night. The invitation rested neatly folded beside his toolbox, and every time he closed his eyes, he wondered whether someone had mailed it to the wrong person. Before sunrise, he ironed his only button-down shirt as carefully as he could inside the church laundry room. The fabric was old but clean. His work boots had been polished until the leather reflected the morning light. Lily watched from the truck while hugging Hope. "Daddy," she said with a hopeful smile, "you look like the pictures Mommy used to keep." Ethan paused for a moment before smiling back. "Your mom always believed a craftsman should respect his work before anyone else does." Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a tiny blue ribbon. "Then you should wear this for good luck." Ethan laughed softly as she tied it around the handle of his toolbox. "Now everyone will know this is the best toolbox in Chicago." She grinned proudly. "Because it belongs to the best daddy." A few hours later, Ethan stepped into the lobby of Sinclair Toy Company. Sunlight poured through towering glass windows onto polished hardwood. Floors where handcrafted toys from every generation filled elegant display cases. Wooden trains, rocking horses, music boxes, and carved animals stood like treasured memories waiting to be discovered again. Ethan slowed his steps, studying each piece with quiet admiration rather than envy. He was not impressed by the luxury surrounding him. He was captivated by the craftsmanship. Charlotte watched discreetly from the mezzanine above. She noticed that he never looked toward the executive offices or expensive artwork. Instead, his attention remained fixed on the tiny details of each handmade toy. "He is examining the joinery," she whispered to Megan. "Not the price tags." Megan smiled knowingly. "That tells you everything." Moments later, Ethan was escorted into a restoration workshop tucked behind the company's museum gallery. The room smelled of cedar, maple, beeswax, and freshly sharpened tools. It felt strangely familiar, almost like stepping into the woodworking shop he had lost years earlier. Waiting on the central workbench sat the damaged rocking bear Charlotte had selected. One leg had split cleanly along the grain, and years of wear had dulled its once warm finish. A restoration manager greeted Ethan warmly. "Mr. Brooks, we would simply like to hear your opinion. There is no pressure." Ethan gently lifted the piece with both hands, turning it slowly beneath the overhead light. He remained silent for nearly a full minute. Finally, he smiled. "Whoever carved this understood children." The manager looked surprised. "How can you tell?" Ethan traced the rounded edges with one finger. "There are no sharp corners. Every curve was softened because the craftsman expected little hands to hold it. This toy was built with love before it was built with skill." Charlotte felt an unexpected warmth fill her heart as she listened through the observation window. Ethan had not spoken like a desperate man searching for work. He had spoken like an artist recognizing another artist across time. Then he carefully placed the rocking bear back onto the bench and quietly added, "I can repair the crack, restore the finish, and preserve every original tool mark. A toy carries memories. You should never erase them while trying to make it look new." In that single moment, Charlotte realized she had not hired someone to fix old toys. She had found someone capable of restoring the stories they carried, and she knew her father's legacy had just found the craftsman it had been waiting for. Ethan accepted the restoration contract with the same quiet gratitude he had shown throughout every hardship. But before signing his name, he looked up at the restoration manager and asked a question that caught everyone by surprise. "May I earn the next project only if the first one meets your standards?" The manager blinked, then smiled. "Most people ask for guarantees before they begin." Ethan carefully placed the pen back on the table. Real craftsmanship should be the guarantee. Hidden behind the observation window, Charlotte exchanged a glance with Megan. Neither woman spoke. They simply watched a man who refused to ask for favors even when life had given him every reason to do so. By the end of the afternoon, Ethan had transformed a quiet corner of the workshop into a place that felt alive again. He sharpened old chisels with patient precision, organized every tool after using it, and spread soft cloth across the workbench before laying the rocking bear down as though it deserved the same care someone might offer a family heirloom. Several employees slowed their steps just to watch him work. There were no dramatic movements, only calm confidence earned through years of experience. Fine curls of maple drifted gently onto the workbench while the warm scent of beeswax filled the room. Ethan paused often, not because he was uncertain, but because he believed would deserve time to reveal its story. One young designer approached with curiosity. "Mr. Brooks, why not replace the damaged leg completely? It would be faster." Ethan smiled kindly. Children do not stop loving a toy because it carries a scar. Families do not stop loving each other for that reason either. If I replace everything that has been hurt, I also erase everything that has been lived. The young designer stood silently for a moment before nodding with newfound respect. Those words quietly traveled through the workshop. By late afternoon, several employees had gathered nearby under different excuses, pretending to organize shelves or review inventory, while secretly listening to the craftsman whose wisdom seemed to belong to another generation. Upstairs, Charlotte stood alone inside her father's private office. On one wall hung a black and white photograph of him carving a wooden horse by hand decades earlier, long before the company had grown into a national brand. She looked from the photograph to the live workshop camera displayed on her computer screen. The resemblance was not in appearance, but in spirit. Both men believed that objects made with care carried something far more valuable than profit. As the workday ended, Ethan gently brushed away the last traces of sawdust and stepped back from the rocking chair. The repaired leg blended almost perfectly with the original wood, preserving every handcrafted detail while restoring its strength. The restoration manager slowly ran his fingers across the finished piece before looking up in amazement. "It feels exactly as it must have felt the day it was first completed." Ethan smiled modestly. "Then the original craftsman deserves the compliment, not me. I only helped his work continue." At that very moment, Charlotte made a decision she had delayed for days. She closed the live camera feed, picked up the framed receipt she had quietly kept from the toy store, and walked toward the workshop. She no longer wanted to admire Ethan Brooks from a distance. It was finally time for the two strangers whose lives had already been connected by one small teddy bear to meet face to face. Ethan was carefully returning every tool to its proper place when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned and saw the elegant woman standing quietly near the workshop entrance. She was dressed simply, yet there was an unmistakable confidence in the way she carried herself. Before either of them spoke, Charlotte's eyes settled on the restored rocking bear resting on the bench. She smiled with genuine admiration. "It looks exactly the way my father would have wanted it to look." Ethan nodded respectfully. "Then I am glad I did not disappoint him." Charlotte stepped closer and gently ran her fingertips across the polished wood. "You never met him?" Ethan smiled. "No, but I think I know the kind of man he was." People leave part of themselves in the things they build. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The workshop was filled only with the quiet ticking of an old wall clock and the faint scent of cedar and beeswax. Finally, Charlotte reached into her handbag and carefully unfolded a small receipt that she had kept protected inside a leather folder. She placed it on the workbench between them. Ethan looked down, immediately recognizing the faded paper. His eyes widened with quiet surprise. It was the receipt from the toy store, the one that had changed Lily's birthday. Charlotte spoke softly. "I believe this belongs to part of your story." Ethan looked up at her, searching her face before understanding slowly settled into his eyes. "It was you." She nodded. "I did not buy that teddy bear because I felt sorry for you. I bought it because I watched a father choose his daughter's dignity over his own pride. I had never seen anything quite like it." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, humbled more than surprised. "I wanted to pay for it myself." "I know," Charlotte replied gently. "That is exactly why I could not walk away." Ethan took a slow breath before carefully folding the receipt again and placing it back in front of her. "Then thank you, not for the toy, but for allowing Lily to keep believing that kindness still exists." Charlotte's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Your daughter reminded me of that too." Just then the workshop door opened again. Megan appeared with a smiling Lily, who had come after school with Pastor Daniel. The little girl ran straight toward Ethan before noticing Charlotte. She stopped, tilted her head thoughtfully, and looked from the woman to the receipt still resting on the bench. "Daddy," she whispered. "She is the lady from the store, isn't she?" Ethan smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetheart. She is." Lily walked slowly toward Charlotte, holding Hope tightly against her chest. "Thank you for my birthday present," she said with complete sincerity. "I named him Hope because of you." Charlotte knelt to Lily's height, her voice almost trembling. "No, sweetheart. Hope was already inside you. I only carried it to the checkout counter." Tears quietly filled Ethan's eyes as he watched the moment unfold. Months later, the Heritage Exhibition opened to visitors from across the country. At its entrance stood the beautifully restored rocking bear beside a small bronze plaque that read, "Every treasured thing deserves a second chance when placed in caring hands." Nearby, Ethan's handcrafted toys filled an entire gallery, each one proudly bearing his signature once again. He and Lily had moved into a modest home, and his restoration workshop had become a permanent part of the company. Before leaving the exhibition that evening, Lily placed Hope gently beside the rocking bear for just a moment and smiled. "You were right, Daddy," she whispered. "Kindness really does come back home." Ethan looked toward Charlotte, who smiled quietly from across the room, and in the peaceful silence that followed, all three of them understood that the greatest miracle had never been a teddy bear, a company, or even a new beginning. It was the simple decision to see another human being with dignity when the rest of the world looked away.